This summer's major exhibition at the Dulwich Picture Gallery, entitled A Crisis of Brilliance, focuses on the period 1908 to 1922 through the work of 6 British artists, namely Mark Gertler, Christopher Nevinson, Dora Carrington, Paul Nash, Stanley Spencer and David Bomberg. They didn't represent a coherent or unified art movement, far from it. Their work constitutes a wonderfully rich and diverse range of styles and subject matter. They came from strikingly contrasting social and cultural backgrounds. Both Bomberg and Gertler were sons of Jewish immigrants who grew up in the impoverished environment of London's East End, while Nash was the son of a Kensington barrister and Carrington the daughter of an engineer with the East India Company. What they did have in common, though, was an abiding friendship forged during their time as students together at the Slade School of Art in London. They also shared an undoubted talent, an ambition to realise that talent, as well as self-confidence and self-belief in their own ability. The Slade at this time was one of the most progressive art schools in the country, and central to its curriculum was the emphasis placed on the fundamental importance of drawing and draftsmanship. And, as if to illustrate this point, the exhibition opens with a group of exquisite portrait drawings powerfully demonstrating the exceptional gifts of these precocious students. In Spencer's self-portrait, for example, we see the artist in serious and pensive mood, yet this beautifully observed red chalk drawing displays a maturity and sureness that belies the fact that Spencer was barely 20 years old at the time. During their time at the Slade, and in the years leading up to World War I, these artists found inspiration in a remarkably diverse range of sources, ranging from the Italian primitives, such as Giotto, Cimabue and Piero della Francesca, to the pre-Raphaelites, Samuel Palmer and William Blake. Added to this mix was the impact of the latest ideas and stylistic idioms of European avant-garde art. Between 1910 and 1914, examples of all the major European art movements had been showcased in exhibitions held principally in London. Throughout this intense, yet brief, 4-year period, these 6 artists were exposed for the first time to examples of post-impressionism, fauvism, cubism, expressionism, futurism and abstraction. The impact on their work was at first tentative and gradual, but once these radically new ideas had, to varying degrees, been absorbed, their work was transformed. And it is the convergence of all these elements, outstanding technical ability, allied to abundant creative imagination, and the sudden influx of fundamentally challenging new ideas, that makes this period a truly golden age. It's a time when progressive British art was boldly experimental, innovative, and richly fertile. Of the 6 artists, it was Nash who seemed to find greatest difficulty in depicting the human form. His attempts at the figure usually left him feeling frustrated and dissatisfied. Yet with nature, he had a seemingly natural ability to depict trees or rolling hills as he felt them to be. That's why he soon chose to make landscape his principal subject. His deep connection with and his profound sympathy for the natural world is apparent in The Wood on a Hill of 1912, a deceptively simple drawing that exudes a lyrical serenity while celebrating the fecundity of nature. But above all, it is the sense of wonder and mystery that the artist clearly has for his subject matter that lends his landscapes a heightened sense of visual impact. It's a characteristic which places him firmly in the tradition of great landscape artists of the past, such as Samuel Palmer and John Constable. The tranquillity of Nash's bucolic landscapes, such as The Wood on a Hill, was brutally exploded once and for all by the catastrophic carnage of the First World War. The war and the sheer scale of its wholesale destruction had a profound and irrevocable impact on the lives and works of all 6 artists, and the clear, concise and illuminating way in which this exhibition demonstrates that fact is one of its many triumphs. Nash had first-hand experience of the conflict. After suffering an injury at the Western Front in 1917, he returned to Ypres later that year as an official war artist, where he produced some of the most searing records of the war, such as this picture, Void, of 1918. In stark contrast to the joyous views of his beloved nature, we are now presented with the hellish scene of a bombed, blasted and horribly scarred landscape of no man's land. Denuded tree stumps rise from the earth like the raised arms of half-buried dead. Trenches are awash with foul, stinking water, ammunition, cannon and rifles left abandoned, while the tattered remains of a uniform, minus the body that once wore it, lies flattened in the frozen earth. Shells explode in the distance, while a lone biplane, fatally damaged, plunges earthward, nose first. This highly charged, visceral image, where nature can be read as a metaphor for humanity, powerfully expresses the artist's bitter rage at the war and its voracious toll in human life. In pictures like this, Nash wanted to express the idea, as he put it, "It is unspeakable, godless, hopeless. I am no longer an artist interested and curious. I am a messenger who will bring back word from the men who are fighting to those who want the war to go on forever. Feeble, inarticulate will be my message, but it will have a bitter truth." Unlike Paul Nash or Stanley Spencer, David Bomberg wholeheartedly embraced the most radically challenging stylistic idioms of avant-garde European art. Like his friend Nevinson, Bomberg was inspired by the modern urban world around him. He revelled in the noise, crowds, speed and energy which characterises so much of modern city life. Bomberg set about conveying his enthusiasm for modernity by breaking up, fracturing and splintering forms in a semi-abstract way, sometimes breaking them into regular, precisely drawn squares. A classic example being the huge In the Hold of 1913, which dominates the entrance to the exhibition. Ostensibly, the picture depicts immigrants climbing out of the hold of a ship that has just arrived from overseas. But the subject is almost impossible to read, amid the kaleidoscope of brightly coloured abstract shapes and forms. It's a style that closely aligned him to the Italian Futurists and its British variant, Vorticism. As the new technology for mechanized warfare demonstrated a new capability for killing on an unprecedented scale, so Bomberg's work became more recognisably representational. In Study for Sappers at Work, a Canadian tunnelling company, Hill 60, St. Eloi of 1919, he still retains something of the modern ethos in the brightly coloured palette, but the figures are now wholly representational and take on a new significance within the composition. True, the advisor to the Canadian government, who commissioned this magisterial picture for the Canadian War Memorials Fund, set certain restrictions and requirements for the commission. Nevertheless, Bomberg, that most uncompromising of artists, seems to have willingly adapted his style and changed emphasis. As his aim was to create a tribute to the heroic miners, it was necessary to make them the principal dominating element of the picture. Study for Sappers at Work is a gloriously powerful celebration of the unseen and largely unsung men who courageously burrowed beneath the earth for months on end, out under no man's land and beyond enemy lines. The magnificent composition, made up of giant figures who stoically pull, push, carry and dig within a claustrophobic framework of wooden braces and support beams, owes more to El Greco's Christ-driving traders from the temple, circa 1600, than to any contemporary source. Yet, when originally submitted, the picture was rejected as too modernist. In fact, it was dismissed as a modernist abortion. So, by way of compromise, a second version was made and accepted. But despite the many merits of the second version, it still lacks the impact, the punch of the first, which remains one of the enduring images of World War I. The futurism and vorticism embraced so enthusiastically by the likes of Nevinson and Bomberg in their pre-war work becomes less strident during the war. There is a realization that the form of radical modernism which subordinates the importance of the human figure is no longer relevant. Their experience of the war forced them to revise and adapt their approach. Stylistic idiom is no longer a means in itself, but a means to an end, and that end is a newfound respect for and celebration of humanity. The title of this focused and highly engaging exhibition, A Crisis of Brilliance, is taken from a phrase coined by Henry Tonks, the Slade drawing master. The brilliance refers to the evident talents of this particular group of his students, and the crisis to the problem of how to apply that talent. What sort of subject matter would challenge them enough to engage them in a meaningful way? Paradoxically, with the onset of World War I, that question was resoundingly answered.